So this is part 2 of my reflection on the ShapeShift layoffs. I think anytime we start observing rounds of layoffs from an industry, I think it's important for CEOs in the space, founders in the space, really anyone in the space who's key and vital to the success of a company to reflect on what's happening, what mistakes were made, what lessons are in this for observers, right? It's great to learn from other people's mistakes, right? That's the best way to learn. So I guess going back to Erik Voorhees' original post about the reason for the layoffs, he alludes to the fact that it really came down to lack of focus, that they had built ShapeShift, had a great deal of success, then went out and created CoinCap and Keep Key and Prism and a variety of other projects that require engineers and leaders and visionaries and evangelists and communications people. And I think there's a few additional lessons in this beyond what I was talking about in the previous episode. I think the first one is to realize that in any given company, I think there's probably the most precious resource is management bandwidth, right? Like there are only so many people that can ultimately take entire parts of the business and just handle them for you. And the bigger you get, the harder it is to get those people, right? When you're hiring founders, there's just all kinds of incentives, and I think connection to the origin story and connection to sort of the founding circumstances. And there's just a lot that I think empowers and inspires and enables these sort of early people to give a damn, right? And to take ownership over what happens. And then kind of each round of each round of hires after that inherits the culture that came right when they were hired. And it's a different set of circumstances. It always is, even in extremely successful public companies where the founding CEO isn't around anymore. It's just a very different set of circumstances, right? And so people coming in are, I think when you're at 100 plus people, they're there for a career and they want to be paid well, and they are thinking about, what's their next thing and what's their next thing and what would they really do if they had all the money in the world and didn't have to leave their house every day and go to work. So so the first thing is that in any company, there's a limited amount of management bandwidth, and that is a very scarce resource, or I might just say ownership bandwidth. The second thing that is pretty limited in companies is, I would call it vision bandwidth, right? In vision and conviction bandwidth, basically, there's only so many big ideas that exist in, I think, any given time that are actually commercially viable, that you can recruit people around. And there just isn't an infinite amount of that, right? Like for creating multiple companies and brands and stuff. So I guess I've been thinking about the difference between my first company when, we did have layoffs. And I do think we did get distracted. I won't go over all the things that we started up there, but kind of the things that Erik is talking about with regards to creating CoinCap and Keep Key and Prism. And, they were creating a market data website, and they had a hardware wallet, and they had a build your own index fund thing, right? Made those mistakes before. How we're trying to avoid them at Nomics. I think the first one is to realize the absolute, just huge amount of value that a good vendor or contractor can provide. Seriously. So if you think about a business, the early stages, I'd say less than, 15 people or less, everyone there should be essential. And not just essential from the point of view where it would be like personally inconvenient if they weren't there, but absolutely essential to the commercial viability of the business, right? If they weren't there, there might be a chance that you'd go out of business, right? That this thing wouldn't work. Every hire you make needs to be like that. So that means that non-core hires, right? People where you are uncertain about the impact that having them would bring, right? Either because you've never done this before, or you've never tested in your business, or you just have, it is not obvious that this is something that will absolutely work, right? You're taking a gamble, you're taking a risk. I recommend outsourcing those things. And sometimes it costs a little bit more. And sometimes you might not know an excellent contractor. And that's probably the biggest problem with this. But an example of this could be SEO, right? Like maybe you're not getting the growth you want and you want to hire an SEO person. Do not hire an SEO person, right? There's lots of firms that can do this. The hardest part is finding someone who's good, who you trust, who has proven experience. And usually these people are not firms, right? They're not just like a team of people and you get on the phone with a CEO and they sell you that they've got like the most genius SEO people and they'll sort of hand off your thing to someone whose job it is to manage your account. That's a bad way to go. The best way to go is to find people that probably don't do any marketing at all, that have businesses that stick around because of word of mouth, and it's just them, right? That maybe it's them and a spouse or one admin, and they do all the work themselves. Those are generally the best people to outsource to for marketing tests, right? For things like SEO, buying ads, things like that. But you can also find maybe not outsource salespeople that are good. I've never seen that work, but you can find outsourced lead gen folks, right? Folks that will, sort of perform in the capacity of an SDR, a sales development representative, who can generate leads, qualified leads, and set up appointments for your sales team. You can find people that are pretty good, okay at that. Again, usually it's a person who does that for a living, or, it's one person in their team of like 3 or 4 highly trained people. In general, the smaller, the better. But you can even do this with product creation, right? If you're going to create an app, or, you're getting that itch to create another product in your business or create another brand, you can outsource those to dev shops. Again, usually the smaller the better, 5 people or under. And you might not get what you need, right? But what that will do is it'll force you to have a conversation about defining the vision, defining the goals. So you hire the outsourced dev shop and they say, okay, we're going to create this thing. What should be in it? Well, now you have to answer that question, and it's usually not going to be to their level of satisfaction. So then you have to create additional docs, and then you need to create screens, and you need to do a whole bunch of things. And you realize that you don't have the time for it. So maybe you shut the product down, or you realize that you need a product person who's thinking, eating, breathing, sleeping this. And you maybe go to hire them and you find that you can't hire them, or you go to outsource it and you realize that there just isn't enough knowledge within your organization about the problem to properly address it. And then you can shut it down, and then you can do that without rounds of layoffs. I've also found Upwork to be really great, right? A lot of people trash Upwork, but there's some really great freelancers on Upwork. And the nature of that relationship is that it works for as long as it works. And that's a two-way thing, right? That's a two-way street. It's not forever. And as soon as it's no longer viable, that is a cord that you can cut, right? Unless you make arrangements to do otherwise. So I think, I think there's lots of things you can do instead of hiring a bunch of people. When I first started in business, I had this idea that I wanted to hire lifers, right? I wanted people to be deep in our culture, steeped in what we do, who are in it for the long haul, right? Who are going to be on this extremely long journey with us. And my mind on that has really changed. I care a lot more about getting the best talent I possibly can. Folks who have great judgment, who are great at communicating, bringing those folks in. And I'd rather have a year of that kind of A player, even if they're a contractor, right? I'd rather have a year of that A player's time, right? Someone who can just come into your organization, deploy their existing playbook, and stand up what they've stood up a few times before successfully, right? Where they're not questioning at each step of the way how they're going to do it, how they're going to reinvent the wheel. They're not discovering all of this. They're just deploying their existing knowledge set or skill set. I'd rather hire that person and have them for, a year than have a lifer who's going to come in and have to figure it out from scratch. And by the time they figured it out, the ship has sailed on that opportunity, right? So much of this is about timing. I know a VC who I really like this saying. He said, like, being too early is the same as being wrong, right? And I think the same goes for, obviously being late is the same as being wrong. And this goes for all kinds of things. This goes for creating products, releasing products. This goes for introductions. So much of this goes for relationships, right? Like, so much of relationships is like contacting someone at the right time, right? When they're open to that kind of interaction with you, when they're at the point of their career, that they're open to responding to you, when the business is in a place where they're considering the kind of thing that they might work with you on. So much of that is timing. So a lot of what's happening here, I think, can be attributed to timing. So I think in general, if there's something that isn't absolutely core to your business, and you should know exactly what those things are, usually there should be less than 3. If something isn't absolutely core to your business, you should outsource it, right? Don't outsource your core competencies. Never outsource your core competencies, but there's a lot you can outsource. An example of this is with us, where there's one position we have open and there's a lot of nuances to finding the right person. So we're hiring a recruiter. And again, it used to be the kind of thing where I would hum and haw about hiring a recruiter. I might want an in-house recruiter to hire someone, or, the feeling was just that startups just find great people and recruit them and don't need external help, right? Because it's really expensive. It's super expensive, right? Like, 20 to 25 to 30% of a given person's like first paycheck. But I've gotten to the point now where if a certain amount of time has passed and I have a spidey sense that this is going to be a long road, just hire a recruiter from the very beginning, and not just anyone, someone where, you can kind of triangulate and get a few points of reference on the fact that they can absolutely get the job done, and then hire that person, right? Same with HR, same with CFOs. There's really great CFOs that you can outsource work to that can provide you a ton of insight, right? And there's probably, I can say for sure there are CFOs for hire that just like specialize in your industry, right? So if you're in vertical SaaS and you've got thousands of customers, like, there are CFOs that will write Python queries to create business dashboards for you, right? And there's just so many great people that you can get without saying, we're going to employ you for a long time and this is a permanent relationship. And I think just reflecting a little bit more on what I see in other companies in our space, I see so many people whose business it is not to create content, that are spending so much time on content marketing, where the CEO is ever present on Twitter, where they're hiring a team of writers to create unique content. And, once you have a newsletter or a podcast, or some kind of report, and then you start charging for it, there's like an endless amount of commentary that you can have about content, right? Endless amount of commentary. Is it right? Is the hook good? Is this relevant? There's so many different directions to go in content. I really think it's harder. It's much harder to create good content than it is to create a good product. I've said this before in a past podcast, but there are lots of people under 25 that have created software, successful software companies. I don't know, when I look at the writers' rooms in Hollywood, when I look at people creating content, directors, people who have produced movies, people with successful podcasts, people with successful newsletters, I can't think of anyone under 25 who's absolutely crushing it with a content business. I can't even think of many writers for those companies that are absolutely essential. Content is just so hard. And if you're doing anything and content, and you're dedicated to the content being great, then that's just going to suck up a bunch of your time. So I see a bunch of people in our space where I think a huge diversion of focus for them is creating content day in and day out. And in most cases, I've seen that come at the cost of really crushing it with their product. So that's my commentary there. Take it or leave it. All right. I have rambled for quite a while now. I hope you enjoyed this. Take care. Bye. Hey, thanks for listening. If you liked this content, please help me out by leaving a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. It provides me with encouragement and it helps other people find the program. Also, if you have a question that you'd like me to answer on the podcast, go to asknomics.com, leave me a question, and I'll do my best to answer it in the next few days. Thanks for listening, and see you tomorrow.